Hello fellow egoists! Welcome to the newest episode of Understanding Ego, the series where we dive deeper into the themes of bllk and its characters. Today's star of the show will be Isagi, as you saw, and we'll be doing a full overview of the character from what his god-given talent is to the true depth of his ego. Now, before fully starting the analysis of it all, I recommend you watch my video about the meaning of devouring in bllk, since it's basically a must-watch to truly understand this video, along with my video about all the eyes in bllk and specifically the part about the spiral eyes, which is the first one. Now to get into the video, it will be broken down in multiple parts, and for this first part we'll start with something simple. What exactly is Isagi's ego? Before actually answering this question, we need to get into the deep topic of what is ego. In bllk, ego isn't related to the raw self-perception definition we would usually see through the lenses of Freud's theory on ego, but rather bllk goes for a definition of ego more akin to desires and intention. So when we ask for a striker's ego, it's more so about asking what exactly is their core desire. Rin, for example, has the ego to destroy hideously by dueling people at their best and then winning in a show of dominance. For Chigiri is to get past people with his speed, etc, etc. So in Isagi's case, what we're really asking is this: what does Isagi desire out of football? And this ego is actually pretty simple in essence. That is to devour that and only that. However, we do need to prove that, and for this task we'll use two examples. First, Isagi's awakening in the 3v3 against Ryo's team, and secondly, Hiyori's words about Isagi in the Ubers match. For the first example, the important part is that when Isagi was at his wits' end, from seeing Baro being useless on the field, what happens to him? He starts digging deeper into himself and then finds the answer to his problems. Devouring Baro. Digging so deep that the spiral eyes appear while he's thinking, showing that this thought actually comes from his deeper ego. Later on, we then get into Isagi's play where we see him devouring Baro. The highlight of this moment is the fact that this scene is meant to be the moment Isagi shows his true color. The manga even describes this as the egoist Nagi was pursuing. And in the episode Nagi rendition of this scene, Ryo refers to this play of devouring as Isagi's true nature. While there are many more details to add, the second example is the most revealing one. In the Ubers match, as some might have noticed, we actually got some panels of Isagi that looked oddly similar to some of Rin's panels in the U20 match. One of those parallels happens in a panel where we see Rin moving up the field with the panel telling us what Rin's football is all about, what his ego is, to devour and destroy hideously. Regarding Isagi's side of this parallel, we get a scene of Hiyori telling us that among Isagi's talents, such as his football IQ or his metavision, the one ability at his core which had blossomed as Isagi's ego did is his ability to devour his rivals on the field, to overshadow them and become the leading actor of the field thanks to his adaptability. Now with this, we can pretty much go with the idea of Isagi's ego being about devouring others. But how exactly does that set him apart from other characters? Now that we know Isagi's ego, we can rightfully ask ourselves, how is it any different than the other strikers in bllk? After all, their goals are also about devouring others and making themselves the lead actor of the show, to shine brighter than anyone and swallow everything with their light. Well, there isn't a difference, at least in the end goal. The true difference between Isagi's ego and the others is that Isagi's ego doesn't have a set way of achieving its end goal. Whereas strikers such as Bachira or Chigiri are reliant on using the ball to either become one with it through their dribbling or to get past people with their speed, Isagi's ego is free of any burden in how to become the protagonist of the field. The best example to see this is during the Menshine match, in a situation where both Yuki and Isagi realistically couldn't score because of Kaiser being on the field to stop Isagi's attempts, and Yuki just not being enough alone to score, both went their own way about it. Yuki delved into a spiral of obsession with scoring, unable to see anything other than this, but Isagi was instead able to look at the situation and understand that if he couldn't become the protagonist through scoring, he would then become the protagonist through beating Kaiser, and by doing so devouring him. Becoming the match's top performer this way, even if it was through 2 assists instead of the goals that he desired but couldn't reach, but still fulfilling his ego of devouring everyone until he can score by himself. Isagi's ego isn't bound by any set way of doing things. As is constantly reminded to us, he can destroy and rebuild himself as many times as needed to fulfill his desires, which is victory. He will stop at nothing to become the protagonist, and while he may be able to become the protagonist through assists, deep down he still desires something that will make him the protagonist in the eyes of everyone, scoring his own goals as a striker. As said before, Isagi's adaptability comes from the fact that his ego isn't bound in any way, though this shows something deeper about the act of devouring. The core of devouring is about asserting one's self, to use others as a pedestal to make yourself shine brighter and steal the role of protagonist from them. In this act, a strong ability to adapt is needed, as devouring means not only to be able to assess the situation correctly, to understand who is the protagonist of the field currently, but also to then find a way to devour them using your current abilities. So while adaptability doesn't need the act of devouring to exist, the act of devouring needs adaptability to exist. And this is why adaptability is such a big trait for not only Isagi but also Barou, a character who also deeply revolves around the theme of devouring. The best example to show how devouring tends to show a deep link to adaptability and a stronger affinity with it is in Isagi's match in the tryouts against the Team B. In this match, we have both Chihiro and Isagi trying to find ways to assert themselves in the match. Chihiro went with the option of coexisting with Karasu and Otoya as a way to prove his worth and was rewarded for it. But in the same match, we also had Isagi who went to then assert himself and not just coexist with his teammates to go for his own goal and devour them through it. And I'm pretty sure that we can all agree after this match that Isagi, because of his goal, showed much more adaptability than Chihiro who simply tried to coexist with his team. But in this match, not only does Isagi show us his adaptability, but also his key weapon, his God-given talent. Before diving into Isagi's talent, we need to ask ourselves, what is a God-given talent? Something important about this concept is that it's portrayed as something above simple talent. Something that the person is inherently born with, but also that this singular talent is extraordinary and beyond belief. Another thing is that this talent tends to be associated with, well, godhood when used. The best example being Nagi and his God-given talent of trapping, which is said to be better than even Chris Prince's, and when you see it through the lenses of a God-given talent, you'll then realize that most of the time Nagi's trapping is talked about, it's related to it being divine, or him making plays with it that are similar to a god's. So we can ask ourselves, does Isagi actually have a God-given talent? Well, the answer to this lies in his light novel. In it, we learn that Isagi at only 3 years old could see flies from a distance that no ordinary person could see, or that he was able to sense rain before it actually started dropping thanks to his sensitivity to the changes in the sky via his smell, sense of touch with the air, and generally his insanely good vision. In general, Isagi is able to detect changes on a level that no ordinary person can, and this is only proven further in the manga. So we know that Isagi has insanely good senses, but can we really call those a God-given talent if they aren't that usable in football? Well, while you may not realize it, Isagi's senses have actually been showing themselves in the story and in really subtle ways. The first and most notable moment that his senses came into play was him feeling something in his back during the Team Y match, where the thing that he felt was then later on revealed to be Nico. As you see, in this moment, Isagi was able to feel not only that someone was behind him, but also that their line of sight was directly on him. A second example that's pretty interesting is back when Isagi was able to sense Rin coming from behind him back in the final match of the second selection. In this panel we'll clearly see that Isagi has no way of directly seeing Rin coming from behind him, but still felt his presence and immediately turned around by reflex. Now, you could say that this is something that's actually pretty normal. We all have those moments where we can feel someone look at us and we turn around to face them. So while those two examples show us that Isagi has really acute senses, they don't show the full potential of them. For this, we need to head on to our final example, the block of Chris Priest's shot. In this scene, Isagi is able to stop Chris Priest's most random shot in the world that even Gagamaru thought was impossible to guard against thanks to an all or nothing bet. But the detail that many must have overlooked is the fact that Isagi was running straight at the weak point that he found without even looking at the ball. And you'll also note that Isagi doesn't say that he saw the weak spot, but rather sensed it. So now with this, we see that Isagi's senses not only give him the potential to feel what's happening on the field without even looking, giving him a sort of ultimate version of metavision where he doesn't even need to scan anymore and can just focus on processing all of the information he gets, but also that when he starts playing in flow, he's compared to a god. Now, doesn't that sound like a talent worthy of being called a god-given talent? But we can ask ourselves, if Isagi has such an OP talent, then why hasn't he been able to use it so far? Well, for this we need to first understand that Isagi isn't necessarily conscious of this ability, and secondly we need to put this ability into perspective. For Isagi to use this ability, he would need to be able to believe in his instincts and senses enough that he believes into what he can feel even if he can't see it. To put ourselves in his shoes, to use Isagi's ability you would need to have enough trust in yourself and your senses that you can walk with a blindfold on and not trip while doing it. And this is exactly why Isagi hasn't been able to use his senses so far and couldn't even if he was conscious of them. Because to use them he would need an ego, a confidence in his abilities big enough to actually act upon them. One detail that goes in this direction is the fact that when Isagi is using his senses in the tryouts match, we see multiple circles in his eyes, and for those who have watched my video about all the eyes designs in bllk, you'll know that the more circles one have in their eyes, the stronger their desire to fulfill their will, and by extension their belief in themselves, will be. As Isagi says, don't think with your head. Move by intuition, use all of my senses, and such a feat is only possible if you have absolute trust into said intuition and senses. But something interesting about abilities in bllk is that they're all related in theme to the aura of the character. Nagi, whose weapon is trapping, has death as his aura. Chihiri, whose speed is associated with a panther, and many others. And for Isagi, his ego is to devour others at all costs, and his weapon being his senses. So what exactly is his aura? While pretty much everyone knows about Isagi's puzzle pieces and the way they're related to how he's able to destroy and build himself back up at a whim, few actually understand how deep his aura is, but also what he tells us about his character. The first thing we have to see is that Isagi's aura isn't only his puzzle pieces, but also a sort of gigantic eye and brain entity made out of puzzles that watch over everyone on the field and that rarely appears, showing itself only during certain moments, but also that the whole field itself is actually made out of Isagi's aura. When Isagi first develops Metavision, we actually see the field being rebuilt with his puzzle pieces along with the new eye and brain entity showing itself for the first time. So Isagi's aura isn't only limited to his body, he also becomes one with the field, and above it all is his true aura, an eye and brain godly entity overseeing everything happening on the field and that devours all of the information in it, taking away the obsolete puzzle pieces that are in Isagi and processing them with the new information to then feed them back. So for a gigantic part of the manga, whenever Isagi was breaking down into puzzle pieces and his puzzle pieces were going back, they were actually going to his aura and that we didn't know of yet. The second important part is that Isagi's aura actually evolved during the Menshine match when he finally unlocked Metavision, and therefore a new part of himself that he didn't know of before, which is what led to this awakening of his aura. The eye entity went from a mix of eyes overseeing the field in white puzzle pieces into then a single eye entity with a mix of black and white puzzle pieces when Isagi then discovers egocentrism. Now we can ask ourselves, what does that change in his aura mean? Well, the basic reading we could give is that Isagi went from using a Metavision in a simple way and so having a basic design, to his aura then incorporating egocentrism into his use of Metavision, which went further into his desire to know everything about the field, as to be able to devour others better. Though the black puzzle pieces aren't there just for show and to make things look better. They're actually related to the fact that most of the time black boxes are used to give a character's thoughts. Those thoughts are meant to come from their deep ego. So those black puzzle pieces appearing are a sign that Isagi has truly incorporated egocentrism into his game. And for our final point about Isagi's aura, is that it all ties perfectly into the act of devouring. While mouth for sure could be something that speaks more to the general reader about the themes of devouring, I would argue that this sort of all-seeing eye aura is actually a better representation of the aim to become the protagonist at all costs and Isagi's adaptability. The first step to devouring is first the ability to self-reflect on your current role. Are you the protagonist and do you want to become it? Who are the ones needed to be devoured, and most importantly, what do I need to do to devour them? So a brain and eye entity being the ultimate representation of devouring bllk is once again a perfect reminder that to become a protagonist, to become a true diamond, you don't need the raw ore being your physical ability, but most importantly the right mindset and ability to self-reflect to prove yourself. So for this part, I'll be talking specifically about all of the original ego talk that has been going on in the community about Isagi and he feel awaken it. So as said before, Isagi's ego is at its core about devouring others, and that has never changed. What Isagi is currently following is his original ego. Simply that the amount it was developed back in his middle school days is probably similar to how it currently is, if not more. With him having the confidence to use his senses, since this is probably how he was able to be a fearless dribbler. What fear is there to have if you can feel everything around you? So while Isagi will surely awaken parts of himself that have been buried deep inside of him the same way that his aura took 182 chapters to truly appear, it's not like he'll develop a whole entirely new quote-unquote original ego. Simply that he'll continue developing himself to a point relatively close to how it must have been in high school and middle school before his ego got suppressed, and then surpass it even further thanks to his experience of despair that followed when he didn't develop his ego further, and that I hope he learned from. Now, don't worry, this part isn't for glazing Isagi, but more so to give a bit of insight on why the story is specifically centered around him. As we saw before, Isagi is a demon of adaptability, so instead of trying to create a set of characters and then making them interact, by creating specific obstacles for Isagi and how he will overcome them, it then helps create characters based on what type of obstacle they should be, which gives a much more straightforward way of creating the essence of a character, instead of making a character and then trying to make them fit into the story. Secondly, by having the ego that he has, he incorporates the true bllk values, as after all the core idea and philosophy of Ego Jinpachi, to disregard everything else and to only see yourself as the main protagonist of the field is Isagi's ego. So through this, we get a main character that's a perfect vessel to the philosophy of bllk, but also one that can show the philosophy's action on a character since his narration is unreliable but in a way that still lets the story flow smoothly. His path is not as intense in terms of having personal obstacles as it is for other characters who have seen it all, which could lead to us to think that he's just a bland character meant to act as the perfect egoist. But we still get moments where we realize that there's something we've been missing or misinterpreting the entire time from Isagi's path, even though he tries to be as rational as possible, such as his argument with Yukimiya where we saw how twisted Isagi really was. So through this, we get a mix of narration that could almost be said to be as true to life as possible when he analyzes the things, but unreliable when it comes to things about himself and those twisted parts of his ego, like him subconsciously viewing himself as the protagonist and being completely egocentric, therefore not even realizing that others are their own protagonist. Something that was even highlighted jokingly in the second selection with Team White saying that he really does see them as supporting characters. But just as said before, Isagi is also a perfect vessel to the story's philosophy and values, being such as mental strength and the ability to become reborn, and that are all incorporated into Isagi as best as possible. And finally, he pays so much attention to other characters in order to learn from them, that integrating other characters into the stories goes really smoothly. He's genuinely the only one who cares enough about all of those people for them to stay relevant because he always learns from them. And honestly, it's pretty rare for a story to try to always stay protag-centered without the constant path switching to have the characters have their own arcs. Now, there are many more things that can be talked about for Isagi's character, such as his future struggles in the story relating to his ego or his mentality, but those are things I'm keeping for another time. If you have any questions about the video or Isagi that you want to ask, you can ask them either in the comment section or in my Discord server of the channel. And with all that said, have a great one, fellow egoists.